So, under the same theme of the creative process as an empathic conversation, we spent 2 days having a workshop at the Granoff Center. And these are the participants that took part in the workshop. And what we'll do is, since we don't have a way to sort of transmit the experience of the workshop directly to you, what we'll do is we'll first go around and introduce ourselves, you know, our school, our names and majors, and then we'll pick one or two of the favorite experiences we've had in the workshop and describe what that moment was, what the exercise was, and kind of give your own personal reflection on it. And then based on that, we can start taking questions and talking about any other discussions that can arise from that question. Is that cool? Okay, so let's start with Jacob.
So you guys done the whole list?
No, just one word.
Oh.
Or say your name, your school, introduce yourself first. Do you guys need mic?
Yeah. All right. My name is Jake. I am a sophomore FAV major, which is film animation video at Rhode Island School of Design from Tampa, Florida. And yeah.
My name is Beryl Bai. I'm a sophomore in graphic design at RISD. I'm from San Jose, California.
Hi, my name is Rachel Ossip. I'm a third of 5 years in the Brown RISD dual degree program studying graphic design and comparative literature, and I'm from also from South Florida.
Hi, my name is Prash. I am in graphic design as well, and I'm a junior. I'm from New Delhi, India.
My name is Phoenix. I'm a junior at RISD studying film animation and video from Knoxville, Tennessee.
I'm Kevin Ramey at RISD, a sophomore in industrial design, and I'm from New York.
I'm Madeline. I'm a recent graduate of Brown with a degree in literary arts, and I'm from Boston.
Hello, my name is Danielle Ganakanti, and I'm the yoga instructor for this workshop. Originally a political theorist from Columbia University and turned yogi studying under Richard Freeman, Nancy Gilrath, Eddie Stern's school.
So just to give you a brief summary, for the 2 days we mixed a lot of different kinds of exercises from a variety of disciplines under the idea that there's many different kinds of empathic conversations. So for example, on the first day, on both days actually, we started off with yoga and meditation. And then we had a more conventional human-to-human empathic conversation, the kind that therapists would sort of talk about in patient-centered therapy, for example. And then we would move on to something a little bit more applied, such as contact improv dancing, where the empathic conversation is a little more implicit. There's no verbal conversation, it's all through the body, all through perhaps minute senses or sometimes a little more macro senses. And then moving on to, for example, having empathic conversations with raw materials, trying to translate some of those qualities and methods that you developed on your own to different kinds of others, so to speak. So what I'll do, I guess, is just go in and pick one of the moments that was most memorable for you and describe what that exercise, if it's an exercise, was in a little more detail, and then talk about what your reflections are about that, and we'll just go around the room. Oh, I should get to pass it all. So let's have this microphone from Phoenix on up. We'll use this microphone.
So we did an exercise where we put our knees together, we looked in each other's eyes, and actually this is the second exercise where we did the kind of same thing. What we did was we looked at a picture of something and we tried to portray that to another person. I guess what I found most interesting about it is when you portray something and you're looking at it, you really put your own experience into like what you're looking at. So let's say you're looking at a picture of a little girl and she's sad. Well, you may relay that experience of you feeling sad as a person, and that comes out, and it's really interesting. Phoenix was my partner. And what he saw and what I was seeing was very much how I felt. And what was even more interesting was that it wasn't the way that the picture so much showed this little girl. It was just the way he saw my experience. And what his experience was, I hope, was what I saw and what he had shown, which was a little boy that had just won this soccer tournament and was very excited, was almost a sort of surprise, and that was his relayed experience onto that image, and that was very interesting to me. I found that very interesting.
And maybe Connie can add a little bit about that particular exercise, just sort of describe it in a little more detail so the audience knows.
Yeah, that moment, I remember that moment so clearly because Phoenix's perception of the picture was a little different than my perception of the picture, because it had to do with baseball competition, and maybe Phoenix can talk about it later, but for Phoenix there was a little question of doubt as to how pure joyful that moment was, and you, Jake, completely read Phoenix's experience of it. But in a bigger picture, Slim and I had actually collaborated on the development of that exercise. In a previous workshop, we had tried it one way, then the leader of a workshop you did in Korea added an element, then Slim came back to me, so there was this, I really appreciated that development of the exercise itself.
But do you guys get an idea of what the exercise entailed? Okay, that's good. All right.
So there was an exercise we did where we had to, before we came in, we thought of a story or we wrote it down so that we can go back to look at it. And it was, I'm thinking most of us chose a very personal story, and it might not have been the most happiest story in our lives, but, and we were supposed to tell this to a partner. I mean, that wasn't the most difficult part. The most difficult part was that we were sitting on the ground, cross-legged, and we were sitting close, so close that our knees have to touch, and we're like within that usual personal bubble that we usually do not intrude into. But personal bubble aside, we also had to stare into each other's eyes non-stop. You cannot look away. Even, I don't know about the rest of us, but when you start doing that, it's very uncomfortable. You don't know how to stare. You don't know which eye to stare at. You don't know, you just, because nobody stares at each other's eyes just regularly high. And, but once you get into it and you try to, I mean, for that exercise, I think we all tried to put aside the rest of the world and all social rules away and to really connect with our partner. So that our stories, even if we were done with them, we would not stop staring at each other. And it becomes just almost normal for us to stare into each other's eyes and souls as we told the stories, that I guess we would see each other's response, even if we hardly flinched or if we blinked, but we could realize that the person was actually listening to us, or they were feeling what we were feeling. Because although everyone's experiences have been different, there's always something deep down that we have that's similar, and it's those feelings. Because our stories were, I mean, my first partner was Phoenix, and both our stories were, well, for us, kind of, it's a very big, huge part of our lives that kind of shaped the people we are now. But that, it was just staring at each other's eyes was what made it feel like, when I told the story back to them, I wasn't just telling the story back to them. I was telling it like I knew how it went through. I knew how, if it was me, how I would have felt or how I did feel. But it was a weird connection, and not many of us get to experience that. So for me, it was just intriguing and something I wish I could do to almost everyone, but that would be awkward.
So one of the most memorable experiences for me was contact improv, which I personally had no idea what that was before. So just in case you don't either, Basically, it's a form of like postmodern dance, and how it works is it's entirely improvisational between two or more people, and it's about the way that your body moves over the surfaces of someone else's. So there's different ways of pivoting and rolling, but you basically want to maintain contact, or just base your movement on those points of contact and how you're shifting in relation to another's body. And we began this process with people who we'd been with for a while, but were definitely not like physically, I think, familiar with. And we were told, okay, now you have to lie down on the ground and let this other person like touch your body completely. And then you have to switch and do it to them. And then you have to close your eyes and rub each other's heads. And then you have to close your eyes and rub your heads together. And it was definitely something that was not part of my everyday experience. But what it kind of developed into was this sort of play space at the end of the exercise, where there was a group of 4 or 5 of us, and we kind of swapped turns, using each other to support one central person who was the dancer or the leader of the dance, and then everyone else was providing sort of surfaces over which they could move. And there was a freedom in that, and sort of a use of one's body that I was totally unfamiliar with, and also just kind of the sensations of, in a non-sexual and non-intimate way, you know, feeling other people's bodies and weird surfaces that you'd never encountered. And so that for me was just something that sort of sparked a lot of thought, and resulted in some fascinating conversations that Slim and I had. And when you think about speech, and when you think about different senses, there's there's often sort of 2 modes of utilizing or looking at them or studying them or something. You know, if you think about the way we use our words to express, you can break it down and look at sort of the functional expression of words, and through linguistics or neurology or things like that. But then there's also, on the other side of that, there's poetry, there's an expressive, broader expressive mode. And with touch, we don't really have a broader expressive mode. We have a way to study it and look at it through biology and through neurology and these other fields that break it down, but it's reserved for very specific fields, but it has such a potential and such a power and such an ability to comfort and delight that we don't on an everyday basis explore. So I think that for me has been sort of a captivating thought to hold from the experience.
I think my most memorable experience, like I think there were many, but if I had to pick one, it would be when the acting workshop was going on with Connie, and we had to stand opposite each other and just like start doing an action with a situation in mind. So, and the other person would respond or join in the situation, whatever they thought it was. So, I don't know, say like, I was thinking I was gonna be in a rock band, and I just went up and tapped my foot, and you were to interpret that. I don't know what you would see it as, but to me, I'm like offering you the drum set, and I'm gonna play guitar, you know. And that my partner was Rachel for that. And when I tapped that drum set and pulled up that invisible chair, the minute I threw on a guitar, like I knew Rachel was gonna join in, you know. And that was like a very good feeling. I felt understood, and I've like had these like sort of like detours in my work where I have to like think about, am I getting misunderstood? Am I like being sincere about what I'm saying and things like that? So like I think that sort of like gestural language without saying anything helped me realize that this is something accessible. Body language and gesture isn't just like expressing yourself with your body like all the time. Just expresses more meaning. Like even the things I'm doing with my hand right now, like that means something, you know, or it's like helping me put forth my thoughts in another way. So, true.
It's in the same vein as Precious. It's very difficult for me to choose or highlight one moment because there were a lot of diverse things going on, and I felt like I learned a lot of diverse things. I was also like videographer for this, so my actual like physical experience in it was a bit different than mostly everyone up here talking. But if I had to choose one, I will choose one that nobody's talked about yet. Also, some exercises that Connie had us do. We lied on the floor. One person was lying on the floor, and there were 3 other individuals who would place their hands somewhere on that person's body, and then they would go around in a circle in 3 times, and each person would say, "I love such and such about you," whatever they wanted to say, and then the person lying down would respond, "Thank you." And it was kind of like a mix between a lot of the linguistic exercises and the contact body improv and the very close personal conversations we had with each other. A mix in a lot of different ways, but when it actually happened, it felt like that mix kind of like broke through to some, at least for me, to some kind of I don't know, holistic or more ready to grasp understanding, because you know, when we're just touching each other with our bodies, it's kind of abnormal. I don't actually think it really is abnormal, but we just don't do that. But we talk to each other all the time. And so when there's like a nice mix between the two where we can actually like touch each other, but then say something about touching each other, there's kind of like a dialogue there. And it can be kind of like a segue into just touching, because I would be fine with just touching by communicating, but not everyone is there right now. So yeah, and it was also, you know, we were asked to say, "I love such and such about you." There was no choice to say, "I hate this about you," or, you know, "This about you really annoys me or makes me feel kind of funny." It was just sort of forcing us to like look at something positive, I guess. That's a very like superficial way of putting it, for me at least, but it was nice to consider like thinking and feeling a person, thinking about a person and feeling a person only in terms of something in the realms of love, that you like kind of couldn't think any other way, which like may to some seem sort of dogmatic, but that's for each of us to find out. I don't think it is. And yeah, I could speak a lot about that and go in depth about many other things, but I feel like I've shared a fair amount, and I will pass it on now.
The thing that resonated for me was contact improv. Just from the instructor's demonstration of it, the unplanned, no choreographed dance that they did, and the beauty of it. And seeing a conversation instead of hearing it, and then later feeling it, was really what interested me about the workshop.
I guess I will talk about one that nobody's talked about. I don't know that I could necessarily call it my favorite part, but it was certainly a very memorable aspect. And it was the third exercise on the first day when we decided to have an empathic conversation with something inanimate, namely Tyvek. The it's that paper you see on the sides of buildings when they're halfway through getting built. It's woven, so it's really strong, and it's sort of water resistant. And you may have noticed I'm the only non-RISD person here, and I traditionally work with language as a poet and my body as a dancer. So the contact improv was right up my alley. I've done a bunch of that, so I felt fine, completely comfortable. And then we came in and were told to spend an hour making 50 objects with the Tyvek, sort of exploring the object, I guess, and its properties, and seeing how that fit in with our experience thus far of empathic conversations. And so this was really daunting for me because I don't use my hands for that in that sort of way. If anything is it's like my own body or other dancers' bodies. So for a good portion of that hour, I was really annoyed. Just sort of frustrated thinking, oh my God, all these RISD kids are gonna come up with amazing things. I don't know what I'm doing. I don't know if I understand the assignment, what's going on. And so feeling frustrated with the Tyvek as a result, especially of that mindset, and finding it not doing what I wanted it to do because I didn't know what I wanted it to do, and I wasn't really listening to what it wanted. And so we went around and we looked at everybody's 50 objects, and they were all different, and nothing was like some magical sculpture work of art, so I felt a little bit better about that, even though there were some really cool things, especially barrels, anything. But we then went on to spend another half hour creating objects just a couple objects that we thought really went to the heart of how Tyvek, how it is different from paper, what is special about it. And so a lot of us worked with just its resilience, just pummeling it, trying to tear it, putting water on it, all sorts of different things. And I really started to understand the story, I don't know if you shared it earlier, but the story about tearing glass, and how you have to really respect what that object is to make something out of it. And at the end, we came together and created something we had a group of 3 with a few of our objects, and my group ended up making this little water pouch thing, which was actually very strong, and sort of put together all of our experiences with the Tyvek as well as a further experience with it. And I guess that was just very eye-opening to me because I had never dealt with an other so abstract. I mean, in my thinking, reading Slim's writings beforehand, I'd said, oh yeah, sure, totally, inanimate objects, yeah, you could definitely empathize with it. But when you're sitting there with a big sheet of Tyvek for an hour and trying to figure out what you're doing and how this works, you really understand that it's a completely different kind of listening, a different kind of respecting, considering, and acting. Just entirely different from what a lot of us experience day to day. And I think even in the past week and a half, whatever it's been, I've been thinking about other things. Even, I saw the world's greatest pianist perform on Sunday, and half the time I was amazed by his fingers, and the other half I was thinking about his relationship with the piano and how he was speaking with those keys and to us and to himself. And I think that will be something that will stay with me. It was really new insight.
I'm interested to sort of know about how this experience has then affected how you make or how you do your work after this process. If it means that you approach it in a different way, or have you seen things in a slightly different way since this workshop?
Kevin, did you have something, or Jake?
I guess.
Kevin, yeah.
So the thing that it affected with me was I always like to relate all these things from conversation to actually making. So what it changed for me maybe was that if I'm going to have a conversation with you, it's no longer I'm having a conversation with you, it's our conversation. So when I'm going to the wood shop, it's not necessarily what am I going to make or like what am I actually doing. It's more of what is what's going on, what's happening at all, what is really the relationship. So it's hard to put into words, but just that mindset has really affected the way I work.
Jacob? Yes.
I don't know, it's kind of interesting. I think one of the things that was interesting was also the reading, because in it kind of detailed this idea of being honest with yourself in order to be honest with what you're working with. Anyway, I do a lot of I do a lot of video editing recently. I'm more of an animator, but kind of experimenting in the interactivity and how you can make something that moves kind of interface with a person. And I think one of the most interesting things I've been thinking about is how my work has kind of passed out of that direction. And it hasn't really, and it was because I really wasn't listening to my work, or myself really. I wasn't being honest with myself and what I wanted to make. This workshop almost served as a reminder to me about what I wanted to do, and where I wanted to go, and at least where I wanted to play and where I wanted to try new things in terms of my work and experiment. And it's really brought up a whole bunch of different questions in the way that I think.
What questions would that be?
Well, I've gotten a lot of interesting questions about like how we use limits to create bounds for ourselves. How we, this building, there's sound that's going on in this room, and the sound is basically limited to this room. You walk outside this, you're barely going to be able to hear anything. It's interesting how when we create an experience within a small environment, we find that we're stuck in this, and we don't really give us any other room to play. We don't look outside of the box. We're just kind of stuck inside that box that we've been set up in. If you ever watch a movie, you're following what the camera sees and what the director wants you to see, or maybe you're trying to see something more, but you're not seeing anything beyond that box. And it's got me thinking a lot about how I can make art or make something that makes you really explore what's inside that box, make you really think about what's there beyond those limits or within whatever limits those may be. So, yeah.
Does anybody else have anything to add?
For me, I guess, well, at the beginning, I don't know, I didn't really expect anything coming into this workshop because it was called Realizing Empathy, and part of the time, especially at the beginning, I was trying to understand and give a definition to empathy. I mean, even right now, I have like maybe a short list of definitions and terms that I put and categorize under empathy, like understanding. That's kind of the one thing that I always go to, which is understanding anything, anyone. But coming out of it, I think all the questions I'm asking now are different, because we did a workshop for like 48 hours almost in, a space with people that we became very familiar with from start to end. But then once we walked out of the box, you try to take what you felt once you were inside. And for me, I thought a lot about the rules that we always have with people, but that when I'm staring at Phoenix or Madeline's eyes, why I don't have to worry about it, why we have to worry about it once we left that room, or why I was worrying about it once I left that room, because society's rules didn't apply for us in those 2 days, or at least didn't apply to me, or I didn't think about it. But that's why I'm trying to figure out how I can put aside as much of those rules as I can to be able to understand other people, to be able to converse with them as much as I did with all my fellow people here. And I'm still working on it. I don't think it's easy. I don't think it's easy for anyone, because we all want to have a much deeper relationship with the people that we know and we love. But how to do that and how to get them on the same level as you, or how to put yourself on the same level as them, is just something that I'm thinking about right now.
Can you pass it to Prash? Oh, that works too.
Well, for me, like, I'm a graphic designer, so I'm working with the computer a lot. And ever since the workshop, like, I've been thinking about it as a tool more deeply. I've been thinking about this for a while, but like, I think the workshop gave me a system to understand it within, a system of empathy to understand it within, to like better articulate my thoughts. And like, just like Slim was using a saw in his talk, what you see of the saw, how you feel it, and like the sound it makes, all of that is part of, it is affecting you as you're making. And with the computer, if I'm making on the computer, then like everything I've seen on the screen, like all the movies, all the YouTube videos, all the Facebook, all the Twitter, like all that posting and making has affected me in the same way that a saw would, the sound of a saw would affect me. Or, you know, when I move my body in dance, that would affect me. So I think, and the thing with computers is, like, for me anyway, I've realized that I have been very conditioned into like seeing certain things in it and expecting certain things from it, and like I've realized that I've just been abusing the unconditional love of this machine. And I need to understand how it has affected my past and how it's affecting my present to really understand my instinct in making on this tool.
Anybody else?
I guess going back a little bit to what Kevin had been saying about the mindset, one thing that has bothered me for as long as I've been a choreographer for dance is that I can picture things in my head. I listen to music, and half the time I have a little dancer going in my head, performing these wonderful things. Yes, it sounds funny. But, you know, whenever I consciously will say, okay, what's my body able to do? And it's doing that in my head, and it's going by my bodily limits, but when I try to enact it in my physical body to the music in space, it's totally different. And most of the time it doesn't work, what I came up with in my head, which has always been very frustrating for me. And I started later on to realize that I had to have it be a more organic process, was how I thought about it, and have it come from improv a lot of the time. But now I think that I'm able to think about it as something of a relationship with my body in time. And one of the things that came up a lot during the workshop was being present, and really like there at the moment and giving your attention to that other and trying to make that space between self and other smaller right then. And so that space between what was going on in my head and what happened when I actually try to do it, I think that I'm going to just try and get rid of that space now and just listen to my body. And when I'm, for instance, performing with my dance group here, rather than seeing another dancer in my way, for instance, if someone's in the wrong place or they're in front of me or something, I guess I am going to think about things as a more productive than problematic issue. And I hope to extend that to other fields than dance as well.
I mean, just real briefly, I think one of the things for me is that I'd never previously considered bravery as an aspect of empathy. It always, like, empathy to me always felt like a receptive role. Like you were, you know, empathy, the whole point of empathy in my mind was that you were going to, you know, be this receptacle for somebody else and then be able to internalize and sort of live in their experience. And then, you know, so why would that, you know, why would that have anything to do with bravery? Because you're not putting out, you're taking in. And so I think just in considering that notion has changed a little bit of the way that I've been working, particularly in terms of the things that I've been writing for some courses, and just realizing that, you know, to be able to have an empathic conversation or have a dialogue, even particularly through writing, there, you know, there is a degree of honesty that's necessary if you want to expect to have some kind of intimate connection. And that doesn't mean necessarily telling the truth, but being honest in expression.
I'm just curious how you negotiate issues of cultural sensitivity in these discussions. I was imagining, like, well, when I was listening to your lecture and when I was listening to the exercises, I felt it was profoundly American, like like this way of like defining terms and like, you know, realizing empathy.com. Like it's a very, and I'm curious about like, because I'm sure this has been brought up before, and I'm curious about people who don't want to go there, if that's acceptable, or like if
Like go where?
To
the website?
Like for example, to and I mean in the exercises about like telling somebody they love something about, which is a really nice thing, you know, and I would go there for sure, but I mean, in a way, people who maybe negotiate private space and public space differently, or people, you know, in my class, there's just a lot of people who are not comfortable speaking in public, or, you know, like all of these subtle, and I'm just wondering, like, because I struggle with that a lot as well, about like how to negotiate all of these, all of this kind of cultural textures, while, you know, while still defining empathy, you know, while still, I just don't, I don't know if you've thought about that.
Does anybody have any thoughts on kind of negotiating?
I'm terrified of the stage. I used to be, I would turn red if I was in a classroom of 25 and my teacher asked me a question and my face would just glow, even if I was like sitting in the front row and I answered the question. But I don't know, like, because you have a class too, but I don't know how a professor would kind of go about doing that. But I guess as someone who volunteered to do this workshop, and I came in and I kind of, and I mentioned to Slim that I gave my heart and soul to you and completely trusted you that there's something here and I want to know about it or understand about it. But I think it's that, like, even though we're a pretty diverse group, and I was actually born in China and I came here while I kind of developed halfway as a kid already, but it's, I guess for me, why it didn't feel like I had cultural boundaries was because when we were doing our exercises, that kind of like what I mean by there was no social rule to it. There was no, I looked at someone's eyes, I didn't look at their skin. Even if Madeline had blue eyes, I didn't see the blue. I don't know how to describe that, but it was, I mean, what I'm describing is kind of personally just for me. But my attitude was that I don't see your background, I only see your story. I don't see your, I guess I could say that, I could also just say I forgot I was Chinese. Yeah. I don't know if that answers. Yeah.
I did that exercise with the touching and the I love you, and Slim and I, in our discussion afterwards, I would never normally do that quickly with a group, ever. But I knew how Slim had designed the whole workshop so that touch had been explored and made okay earlier in the day. And there are layers that I knew had been put in place. However, even then, had it not felt right, would not have done it. And I was always like, am I going to go there? Maybe yes, maybe no. But the other thing I think, in terms of it's a constant negotiation, because what if there's somebody who still at that point is uncomfortable with it? How can you set it up so that they can somehow express that in the moment, so they don't just endure it, and so that you can then adjust the exercise accordingly, so that maybe there is no touch and they just talk, or the other way around. Maybe there is a little bit of touch but no talk. So I think the question is always how to be human without denying the cultural or the personal. And it's just, for me, it's a constant negotiation. But knowing how Slim had carefully designed the whole thing, it could go there.
And I think there's something interesting about, and there's two thoughts that come to my mind. One of them is, so if people think of design as something you design and kind of go, this is not exactly that, in the sense that you design just so that you can improvise inside it, if that makes any sense. So in the workshop I ran in Seoul, I designed it in such a way that there's all the things that Connie was talking about in terms of escalation. But then I got there, and although I am supposed to be Korean, I haven't lived there very long, so I don't actually know the culture very well. And what ended up happening was me, in real time, changing the entire workshop as I went along. Just trying to figure out, what's their comfort level, what's their, what are some of the sensitivities that I thought I had but I didn't have, and how I can tweak that. And I think it's almost like the exact same empathic conversation I'm having with the workshop participants in real time. And there's really no room for you just kind of like sitting back and saying, yeah, you do this exercise and I'll just sleep or something like that. It just seems like a very, very active way of participating in the workshop. Although from the student side, it might look like that guy's not doing anything. He's just kind of there. The other thing that came to my mind was I had a really interesting conversation with one of the students of that workshop in Korea. And he was, so the university I did this in Korea was a very technical college, meaning most of the students were non-creatives in the tradition, in the sort of the cliche way of thinking about it. They're mostly engineers, scientists. And one of the students was a technical film editor. He was like a guy who cuts film. And he was in his mid-20s and he went to the army. He was sort of very typically Korean in the sense that he was very conservative and he was very, he had a clear boundary between man and women. That's the way he sort of put it. And he went through the 2 days. He looked a little bit uncomfortable a lot of times, but he didn't fully express that. But after the workshop, he and I were having a one-on-one post-workshop interview. And he came in really excited because he felt he had to share something with me. And I was like, okay, so share this thing that you've learned from the workshop. And he said, this is something really amazing and I have to share with you. And what is that? And he said, this is the first time in his entire adult life where he finally realized that he is capable of having an honest conversation with another human being without alcohol. And that's not something I designed for. But it was profound for me. Like, it's something that had never even occurred to me. But in that culture, he had somehow gotten in this mode where he had to drink a lot, although he didn't want to. But it was part of the culture. It was part of business. It was part of how friendships were made. And it sort of sunk into him that this is a necessary means to having this honest conversation and making friends. And this was the first time ever in his adult life where he realized, maybe not. And things like that makes me wonder, is that cultural? Is it only happening in Korea? Or is that something that's, far broader? And these kinds of questions that I'm sort of bumping into are making me think a lot about, what is that cultural boundary? Where does that lie? And how flexible is it? And how do you actually navigate those boundaries too?
I was just going to say that one of the things I was thinking about that was a little bit problematic to me during the whole workshop was how would this be different with non-traditionally creative makers, people that had not signed up for this, that filled out an application and were actually chosen from a pool of applicants to take this workshop. And so one of the things I was thinking about is that as different kinds of makers, artists, we're all people that are used to some extent, putting ourselves out on the line for other people to interpret, whether it's, your artwork hanging on a wall. You're not always going to be standing there to explain to the viewer what your painting means. If I'm dancing, I can't write in the program this huge essay about what this dance means to me and this movement means this. It's all about letting people interpret that and get what they will from it. And so it could be that people that are traditional artists or are used to those kinds of practices are more comfortable with this kind of conversation. So I guess maybe it's like an artistic culture of being more able to put yourself out there and be open, even if certain aspects, like, say some of us would be more comfortable doing contact improv than having a one-on-one conversation, just depending on the person. So I think that's another kind of culture that I was thinking about, and I would really be interested to see how this workshop would work if it was something that was, say, brought into a middle or high school where students didn't elect to take it, and it's also a place where they could maybe really use it, considering how much of a lack of empathy is sometimes displayed at those ages, whether it's on the internet or in person through bullying and so on and so forth. So I guess I definitely think about the question of cultures as well, and not necessarily national cultures, though certain aspects of it will definitely carry over, like reading body language. Certainly body language is different in different cultures, and you may need to watch others a little bit to see what certain gestures mean. Like if you're in certain parts of Italy, you're gonna have to learn a whole dictionary of hand gestures just to understand what people are really saying. And so there's certainly that kind of cultural you know what I mean. But that also intersects with other kinds of cultural populations that people might be a part of, as well as personal experiences that may make them less willing to share in a certain way or certain facts.
The one thing that teachers end up doing is not being vulnerable in the room. And one of the things I heard you say is that you saw your plan wasn't working and you changed it up. And I think we have to be brave and vulnerable in the room, and that these actions like listening, those go across culture. When someone feels like they've been heard, like if you're in Italy, traveling around, and Americans, sometimes will just not try to speak the language and start yelling and all of that. But if you actually just try to speak and you have your little dictionary out, and you're attempting to communicate, people actually respond to that. And to me, something like listening cuts across any cultural boundary. And it also, your willingness to say, I don't know, which is a thing that teachers, professors, whatever, it's like, oh, you must know everything because you have a degree. No. If you actually come like that, something else can happen, and empathy is happening between you and the student, and it makes a safer place for people who are like, I'm not trying to touch you, to go there. You know what I'm saying? So I do think some of this is not, I hear you, that there are cultural boundaries, but I know just from the way you look at someone in a different country, that they they either feel like you've seen them or you haven't seen them, and they react to that.
I mean, the point about definition is very interesting because I made a point during the workshop not to, write down my definition of empathy and say, this is the definition of empathy, almost in a conscious way, because as I was writing the book, I had to read hundreds of definitions of empathy, and I was surprised at how nobody agrees on what empathy actually is. And so defining has almost become simply a way to prevent misunderstanding, as opposed to saying this is the right way to define something. And I think there's like a nuance that's worth investigating there, because there have been so many conversations when I was having with somebody where we were talking about something completely different, yet we were using the same words, and there was so much misunderstanding that the person got frustrated and didn't want to have any more conversations, not because we were not having I guess we were not having a constructive conversation, but simply because it sort of arrows all the way back to the fact that the clarity was simply not there. And if I knew that person's definition and my definition was different, that's a different story, then that would be fine. But the fact that we thought we knew each other's definitions and that they were the same, and we assumed that, and had this sort of conversation that went nowhere, was something that I kind of wanted to prevent, I guess.
Coming from my sphere, the yoga world is something that's kind of an example of that. It's traditionally from India, very strict rules and formulas, and it's been adapted in this country wildly, like across the spectrum of every particular genre of interpretation. So I think just being in this time in history where everything is globalizing so rapidly with technology that usually these conversations aren't had as things are hurled across boundaries, national boundaries, and things ensue that are good and bad, mostly good. But I can definitely say that there was a lot of care that went into making sure everyone was comfortable, and if that ever was an issue, like everyone was sensitive and skillful enough to tweak it as needed and give people space. That was a really big, we had figured out that our relationship was that we both realized the importance of space, and my job was fostering that in the nervous system on the level of perception, and Slim sees that in design, and somehow we can join that way. So.
And there was a very interesting process that went to, so when I went to Korea to do this workshop, I had to translate everything. And that in and of itself took a lot of empathy. And what was really interesting to me was I was reminded of this because she just said space. So it turns out that there is a specific word in Korean that gets at the quality of this sort of comfort. That's not the same as feeling comfortable, but there is enough space that you feel, there's like a lot of qualities involved in this one word that it's in Korea. I just cannot find the word in English. And the poor translation that I could offer was space. But I just find that really interesting. Like it's the language itself, or the person who made up this word, at some point in time had felt this and said, I want a word for this. And this is different from space, and it's different from comfort, but it's this thing that I feel is important to draw our attention to, and for that reason, this word was born. And I think there's something to that, and it kind of, to me, gets to the point of how people feel in a certain space, enough to be able to, do these exercises and kind of engage in it. And I think it's something that you were sort of starting to pay more and more attention to, whether it's in schools, in families, or whatever it may be, to sort of cultivate that kind of environment where that's deemed more, I don't want to say appropriate, but possible, than sort of shunned or kind of swept under the rug kind of a thing.
And that actually only happens when you interface with something that is different from you, whether it's an object or a cultural nuance difference. So that's one of the really good things that comes out of confrontation sometimes, and just interface, in other words.
So very briefly, Well, I'm from India, and there, I think it's very different for me to like see everything here too. Like even presentations like this doesn't happen, you know. Like it's not designed that way. It's not like fluid, and there's no remotes controlling stuff. There's just people like on. I don't know. It's just different. So like even stop signs here, like I see the word stop, whereas people might see that thing just like immediately tells them to stop, you know, without reading the word. But I think what I discovered about like that whole thing was like that I need to tell the story of who I am, like where am I coming from, you know, like I need to somehow distill that into my everyday feedback, or like just like what I put out there in the world. And I think as long as that happens and people they respond to that, and you know, they want to understand more. So as long as that is happening, I think, I don't know, I'm sort of like finding ways to fuse these cultural differences, and I think that's what's important.
Any other questions?
But I'm reminded that last year when Gloria Steinem was here, she talked about empathy as kind of the new revolution, and you know, you guys and your participation in it feels like part of that, and I'm really thrilled, and I wish my students were here, like I told them to be. But I think it's really important what you're doing, and because it seems this is not, at least in this society, it's not something we're cultivating at all. So if someone has to teach it and talk about it and define it, then, you know, bravo. So thank you.
Yeah, so following that path, you know, thank you so much, Slim, for following your own path. You know, I didn't bring my glasses, so I can't read to you all the things that he's achieved. But I'm sure if you go to realizingempathy.com. But thank you for being an explorer and exploring with us, and for giving us the space and the time to explore together.
Thank you. All right, thank you, everyone.